Thanks to the great work of VGC and writer Chris Scullion, we now have a pretty good idea who is working on Metroid Prime 4 Beyond over at Retro Studios. It's a very long list, of course. You don't make a game like this with a few buddies, but there are a lot of very interesting takeaways when it comes to this group of people. So I figured we'd take a closer look at the many minds involved in creating Prime 4 and see what stands out. Oh, and it's important to note, we don't know for certain whether these people will all end up in Prime 4's credits, but they have all worked at Retro during the past few years and most likely have contributed at least something to Prime 4's creation. It's also possible some developers are missing, for example because they work at Nintendo or because they're recent hires. Alright, let's get the show on the road with the most obvious group of people, the Retro Studios mainstays. They've been at Retro for years, even decades sometimes, and are still with the company as they wrap up work on Prime 4. This group is a little less than half of the total list of names, which is honestly less than I would expect. After all, it means the other half is yet to get a single credit for a Retro game. That's a lot of new people hired in the last few years. Anyway, within this group of Retro veterans are 20 people who have worked on Metroid before. This includes some higher-ups like Michael Kelbaugh, who has been Retro CEO since Prime 2, and Director of Planning Ryan Harris, who has been with the company since its inception. In total, only 6 people still at Retro have previously worked on all games in the Prime trilogy, and are undoubtedly hoping to make it 4. There are also newer faces among this group, whose only credit for Metroid is on Prime Remastered. Interestingly enough though, the majority of Retro veterans working on Prime 4 have no experience with Metroid whatsoever. Instead, their only contribution to Retro games hail from the Donkey Kong Country games, Returns and Tropical Freeze. 30 of the around 50 Retro veterans have earned their stripes with one or both of those games. Either way, I think it's fair to say that enough of the core Retro quality we have come to love is still present in the staff at this moment. Experience with Prime is relatively low, but those Donkey Kong titles are phenomenal platformers, so there's nothing to worry about based on that. On to arguably the more interesting group, the other half. The new faces at the Retro Studios water cooler, and more importantly, where they came from. These people can be fragmented into 5 smaller groups of about equal size. The first of these I want to look at is a group of around 11 people who have previously worked closely with Sony. The most high profile name there is Nathan Ramos, who is now senior producer for Retro, but previously worked on Horizon Forbidden West, one of Sony's flagship franchises. Just like some other current Retro employees, he is also credited on the Callisto Protocol, a sci-fi survival horror game from 2022. It's considered a spiritual successor to Dead Space, which is of course a game that lies not too far away from Metroid Prime. There's also a handful of employees who previously worked at Naughty Dog and have been credited on installments of The Last of Us. Most of these are animators. In fact, most of the people who have previous experience working on Sony exclusives now work at Retro in the animation department. As such, this is a group I don't think we can draw too many conclusions from. They have worked on some stellar titles, but it's not like we can say Prime 4 will resemble The Last of Us or God of War in any way, really. Simply because a few names have worked on both. But that doesn't apply for the next 2 groups, however, the first of which is the small but important sextet who have previously worked at Bungie on the Halo franchise. Halo and Metroid Prime have been long intertwined and compared, so some folks working on both series makes perfect sense. What is particularly interesting about this though is the position these former Halo devs hold, as they're not exactly low on the ladder. One example is senior producer Jessica Spence, who has been at Retro for a while now and has already earned credits with the company for Tropical Freeze. She previously worked at Bungie however, and is credited on Halo 4 all the way back in 2012. The other former Bungie staff are a lot newer to the Retro building, but some will play an important role in Prime 4's development, like Chris Lewis and Kyle Heffley. Lewis is Retro's senior environment artist, and looking at what we've seen from Prime 4's trailer, I would say his experience working on Halo 4, 5 and Infinite is pretty evident. Before this information became public, I'd already seen some people in the fandom point out similarities to Halo in the trailer, so if you were one of them, congratulations, you seem to be correct. Kyle Heffley also worked on those 3 Halo titles, albeit as character designer. He is currently employed at Retro as lead character artist, meaning he oversees the design team working on Samus's new appearance, Silax's return, and any and all new characters the game might introduce. I'm not too at home in the characters of the Halo franchise, but from what I've seen, it doesn't seem too different from Metroid, so this seems like a fitting appointment. The next group is remarkably similar. 10 people this time who have a ton of experience with another massive first-person shooter franchise, Call of Duty. And once again, some hold very important positions within Retro and will surely impact Metroid Prime 4. Two of them are colleagues of Chris Lewis, both senior environment artists, Jonathan Garcia and Will Petrosky. Garcia previously worked on Call of Duty World War II and also spent a lengthy amount of time at Telltale Games, while Petrosky has a lot of experience working on several Call of Duty titles. Now, no reason to panic if think Prime 4 is suddenly gonna turn into a shooter fest. These appointments make perfect sense. After all, plenty of Prime's areas follow a design that resemble typical first-person shooters layouts, as you'd find in Call of Duty campaigns for example. And considering the trailer already showed the space pirates are back in full force, I doubt we've seen the last of them. Another high-ranked name with Call of Duty experience is Nanda Kumar, Retro's engineering manager. He previously worked at Treyarch, where he was lead engineer for several Black Ops games. I'm thinking that bodes very well for the shooting mechanics in this game. Based on this collection of people so far, I would forgive you for thinking all their past games are a bit serious or mature. Metroid is just as much an adventure game as a shooter after all, if not more, and we haven't seen too many new hires with experiences in that genre. Well, worry not my friends, for the next group of around 7 people have recently been brought in from the now defunct Junction Point Studios. This used to be a subsidiary of Disney, and they were responsible for the 2 games in the epic Mickey series. They're not exactly Metroidvania titles, but I would consider them to fit the mold of an adventure or platform game, which definitely aligns with Metroid's values. In a similar genre are also a couple of folks who have worked on New Super Lucky's Tale, a platformer from Microsoft from 2020, which is heavily inspired by Nintendo's many platformers. That kind of expertise and experience is not easy to find in the West, so these hires definitely make sense. If not for Metroid, then for Donkey Kong or whatever Retro may be working on for Nintendo in the future. And while that sums up what I would consider the main groups within Prime 4's presumed development team, there are some other individuals or small clusters with interesting backgrounds. For example, there is a decent subset of new employees who previously worked at EA, with experience on Star Wars Battlefront or that other successful space trilogy, Mass Effect. Definitely feels like fitting experience for a title like Prime 4. You've also got audio supervisor Scott Peterson, who previously worked for Blizzard, and even a programmer who used to work for Rockstar. So Retro has truly become a collection of employees who have worked in all kinds of successful American gaming companies. In fact, some have experience beyond gaming, like storyboard artist Rachel Doda, who previously worked for Nickelodeon, and lighting artist Farhez Rayani, whose past employer is Pixar. And there are several of their colleagues in the art and cinematic department who have previously worked on Marvel movies. So yeah, Retro has spent these last few years expanding and have brought in a large amount of expertise from all over the entertainment world. And I for one can't wait to see what it leads to when we finally get our hands on Prime 4 Beyond in 2025. That's been all for me today, but if you enjoyed this breakdown, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Metroid content, both Prime 4 and everything beyond. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.